Okay, my name is Bria Turner, and I'm arguing for my client to be able to get assisted suicide. Um, I feel like my client should be able to get assisted medical aid in dying because he's in constant pain. According to renowned surgeon Dr. Atul Gawande from the Journal of the American Society on Aging, society has an unwillingness to confront death in the dying process, which is why so many people are left to suffer when they don't need to. These specific advances are associated with prolongations of disease states and suffering. My client is at a point where he knows and has accepted that death is the only outcome of his disease and no longer wants to live in pain if he knows he doesn't have to. He also feels that this way will help his family cope with his loss better because it is a decision he is making on his own. He knows that this way will give him a peaceful death, which is what he wants. According to endoflifechoices.org, most hospice places can provide palliative care to most, but not all, that are suffering. So therefore, those who they cannot help relieve the pain for have to suffer because there's nothing they can do to help them. My client feels like he has lost his independence and he's not able to do activities or anything enjoyable because he's forced to lay in bed all day due to his terminal illness. A study done by verywellhealth.com showed that 112 patients who received medical aid in dying had these same issues and were approved. So I don't see why my client should not be approved as well because he's in a good mental state and knows this is what he wants.
Hi, my name is Sam Vexstein, and I'm arguing in opposition to the patient that is seeking to receive assisted suicide. Uh, some reasons in opposition is that enabling aid in dying may lead to a slippery path that leads to care rationing and may violate certain religious principles. According to an article that was written by JCO Oncology Practice, appropriate withdrawal of care is openly and widely practiced in the United States without a need for a PAS or PAD, which is actually the lethal injection that people receive. So pretty much by just simply withholding the treatments that people need, they can get assisted suicide without actually having to seek a lethal dose of PAS or PAD, and it could be a safer alternative. Uh, and there's other alternative treatments that are available, such as palliative care and hospices. Uh, we don't have to kill patients to kill the symptoms. There's specific places that are designed for reducing as many symptoms as possible. So many patients may not realize that they can completely alleviate all their symptoms without actually having to receive a lethal injection. Um, Opening the doors to voluntary euthanasia and assisted suicide could also lead to non-voluntary and involuntary euthanasia by giving doctors the power to decide when a patient's life is not worth living. Uh, and lastly, the assumption that patients should have a right to die would impose on doctors a duty to kill. And being a doctor is a stressful enough position, and it comes with enough duties in terms of keeping people alive. And I don't think putting a system in place where doctors actually have to have a duty to decide whether people are to die or live would be a good thing to impose on them.
A lot of people think this is a form of suicide, but it's not. Medical aid in dying is only done on people who are terminally ill and will die soon. And according to the End of Life Choices article, there are very strict limits that must be met in order to even be eligible for it. The patient must be terminally ill as well as mentally competent, which is determined and confirmed by two physicians that have been working with that patient. There are a lot of hoops they have to jump through in order to be able to be accepted. So if my client is willing to go through all of that in order to be put out of his pain and suffering, then that is not something that should be denied to him. He's already in a very painful state, and he knows that as he gets closer to death, he will start to lose more of his abilities, and he does not want to get to a point where he's in so much pain, unbearable pain, and his family can only sit there and watch him suffer. He wants it to be his choice when he leaves, and that is why he's choosing to do this route of assisted medical aid in dying. Um, My question to you is, why should we keep someone alive who doesn't want to be and is suffering?
All right. So in the United States, there already is a healthcare system that is very flawed and imperfect. And most of the time, people end up overpaying for the care that they need. And overall, there's a lot of corruption and monopolization in our healthcare system. I believe that putting a system in place for assisted suiciding is a deadly mix with our already profit driven healthcare system. Some patients in Oregon and California have received word that their health insurance will pay for assisted suicide, but will not pay for treatment that may sustain their lives. And that was reported by University of Santa Barbara.org. So we're already seeing some corruption where they're seeking to pay for they're not seeking to allow people to give treatment, rather they're willing to pay for their assisted suicide. uh, Additionally, there's a dangerously broad definition of terminal illness, and what this does is it leaves the door open to people who don't actually have terminal illnesses applying for aid in dying. So we before something actually gets legalized, there needs to be a much more concrete definition of what a terminal illness is. Assisted suicide laws also typically appear to limit eligibility to terminally ill patients who are expected to die within 6 months, but it doesn't distinguish between persons who will die within 6 months with treatment and those who will die within 6 months without treatment. So the definitions are still way too loose to legalize it, and there needs to be more concrete ones.
Okay. I think that there have been a lot of studies done behind why this is the best way for some people. So I already know that patients, they have to meet a lot of requirements in order to be approved. So the possibility of someone who's not truly terminally ill being approved is next to impossible. While there are medicines that can help relieve the pain to an extent while they're getting closer to death, they're still going to be in a great amount of pain. And I don't think they should be forced to deal with that if they don't want to. Um, you said that it can become a deadly mix, um, a profit like driven by the healthcare system. And my solution to that is heavily monitoring and overseeing the financial aspects that go into the assisted suicide system to ensure that there's no corruption and that everything is done legally. Um, I think that if my client is passing all the tests that he needs in order to get the medical aid in dying, that he should be given that. And there's a lot he has to go through and do to get to that point. So if he doesn't want to be in pain and deal with this longer, even though there are solutions that could keep him alive or whatever, he knows his pain levels and he knows how he feels. So if he thinks that it's time for him to go and that's what's best for him and his family, then I feel like that's what should be awarded to him.
I hear your solutions regarding personal freedoms and that people should be able to decide for themselves if they want to receive assisted suicide. But my solution for this specific case would to be to send the client to palliative care and or a hospice rather than assisted suicide. Uh, there's still too many questions regarding assisted suicide and too many loose definitions regarding terminal illness. And it'd be incredibly dangerous to implement a system that isn't fully sound. And there have been problems in the past when it comes to implementing a system of assisted suicide in a few countries, such as the Netherlands and Luxembourg. They have actually implemented assisted suicide, and there have been doctors that have reported that they actually weren't in favor of all of the assisted suicides that they had to deal out. And that was according to care.org/UK. Um, Additionally, uh, there's just too much of a duty to place upon doctors to have to decide if people should live or die. And being a doctor already comes with enough duties. Opening up the door to voluntary euthanasia could definitely leave the doors open to people who don't actually have a terminal illness seeking assisted suicide. Not only that, but there are other care treatments available, such as hospices and palliative care. One of my proposed solutions would be to provide a education starting at a middle school and high school level of education on what you could do in this circumstance, and that there are multiple options that you can take, not just one. And although I do value people having their own personal freedoms, assisted suicide in general as a whole, there's still way too many things that need to be worked out. The system is way too loose, and assisted suicide laws need to be fortified more before they're actually go into action in more than 6 states.